Hey, good afternoon, everybody. This is your host of Learn How to See Better, Drew Davis, and I want to welcome you all today and appreciate you joining me for this session where we are going to talk about setbacks and comebacks. Now, you wouldn't think that those two would actually go together, but I will start this thing off by telling you exactly where I'm going with the final phrase: a setback is just a setup for a comeback, baby. And the reason I state it like that is not just a cool quote that I heard somebody say once, but I actually started thinking a little bit about how setbacks are something that we all face at some point in our lives. We'll have a setback in progress for a goal that we're trying to achieve. We'll have setback against a plan that we have designed for ourselves, and a setback can come expectedly. It may come unexpectedly, rather, and how we respond to that setback is going to do a lot to determine what our ability to actually come back is like. So what do I mean about that? I'll give a couple of examples. I can think of times when I faced setbacks in my own world and what I was able to do about those setbacks to actually create a comeback, right? It's no different than when you look at sports. You look at sports, and there's typically in most sports some sort of break in the action. Halftime. And what's typically done in halftime? You think about football season. A team is down and they're going into halftime. What does coach do? They go in the locker room. Coach, he's yelling, throwing stuff, but really he's trying to reframe and recalibrate their thinking frequency. They've either got to get their head in the game, or they really need to get their performance up to par, up to their potential, if they want to see and expect different results. So what all does that entail? Well, it really just entails taking a look at what's going on, what's been going on, having the ability to reflect on the most recent series or sequence of events. It actually makes me think back to one of the greatest comebacks that's ever known in sports playoff history. Is actually a team I used to root for when I was young, the Buffalo Bills. And if you're a football fan, you may know about this one. It's a story how the Bills were down to the Houston Oilers in an early round playoff game. This was like right in the early 90s, okay? And what basically happened is, the Bills were the best team in the AFC. They had been for some time. They were the ones, kind of running the table, so to speak. And they weren't expected to have, much opposition by the opposing team, the Houston Oilers, which had already proven themselves as another high-powered offense, but they weren't the Buffalo Bills, right? So the long and short of this is, all of a sudden it's halftime in this playoff game, and the Bills are down, 4 or 5 touchdowns. I think it was, 35-0 at halftime. It was really, really, really bad. And you'd think, what in the world are these guys going to do? Might as well just fold it up and go home, right? You're getting blown out. I can't remember exactly if the game was at home or not. I did watch that game, but, as I'm pulling this story, from thin air, just on a quick recollection, those are some of the details I don't have. But you're down 35-0 at the half, and all of a sudden, what had to be said, what had to be done, what beliefs had to be created or recreated at the half to get them in a position where they could actually turn around the circumstances they were in. And, I think if my memory serves me correctly, I want to say early in the third quarter, they even got down to, it was like 38-3. And then all of a sudden, the tide turned. And the Bills were able to perform an amazing comeback from the backup quarterback, Frank Reich, and go on to win the game. I think it was 41-38 in overtime, right? And they went on to go win the AFC Championship and go into play in the Super Bowl. And so that's just one example of how, they had a huge setback. They didn't show up for the first half. They were getting drug up and down the field, but something happened. There was essentially a corrective speech or set of actions, or somebody replayed the tape and just reminded everybody why they were there so that they could recalibrate and get their team back on the right track. And they were effectively do so. They were able to effectively do so. And I think that's really powerful, because we all have the opportunity to do that in our own lives. It actually, to keep the analogy on the sports, I remember even going back to when I wrestled in high school, right? It's going into my senior year, and we were having a change in the guard with the coaches were changing, right? The previous coach had stepped down that I had a really good relationship, and then in steps a new coach that had been around and I had a little bit of a difference of opinion with. We didn't necessarily see things eye to eye. And so, I didn't come into the season with the right mindset. I didn't know if I was going to wrestle. I just, had a little bit of a bad attitude about the whole thing because I felt like the odds were stacked against me with this coach that didn't like me and all this other, head trash that was, really something that I didn't need to be focusing on in my senior year as the team captain, right? I needed to be having my mind focused on having my best performance ever and being able to go into that senior year and crush it. But what I actually found was that, the poor preparation I had in getting my mind ready for the season my senior year was showing up in my results. I think that with the finish that I'd had to my junior year, I just kind of felt like I was going to, come in and take over. And a great championship attitude to have, but I didn't at the time have the championship work ethic to match it. Just being honest. And what I found myself in was a situation where the first half of my senior year, I'm thinking, gosh, team captain, I'm supposed to be just knocking it out of the park, taking out everybody I run up against. And lo and behold, I kind of had, honestly, a mediocre record. I had some early losses in the season to people, opponents that I shouldn't have lost matches to. And it was just very humbling all of a sudden. I'm supposed to be this pillar of leadership, the only guy on the team that had wrestled all 4 years, and I'm having a lackluster opening to my senior year. And it forced me to dig deep and look deep within myself and say, my goodness, what have I done to create this? And I remember over the Christmas break thinking, I would generally just not train that hard during the holidays because I had that mentality like most, kids in high school. They're it's Christmas break. You're not really going hard. You're not really in the trenches. In a lot of cases, people haven't developed that mindset of a champion yet, especially to do the things in the off season that matter most, to put themselves in a position for success. So in my scenario, I was looking at things as like, hey, the compound effect of these lessons had finally set in, and I recognized that if I was going to make my own comeback, because I was dealing with a setback of having mediocre results in my last year, and I had high expectations of myself. So I had to be able to formulate a comeback like no other and put together a plan for how I was going to dig myself out of the ditch and start to get some respectable stats put together so I could show up in that second half. And it all started in my focus on the work, and that work being an obstacle that would pave the way to my eventual success. I had to go ahead and eat that frog. I needed to go ahead and pour it on a little bit extra in those winter practices, and the compound effect of those efforts truly did show up in the second half of the season when I was able to turn things around, and now I had the endurance that my opponents didn't have. Now I had a little bit better technique that my rusty opponents just didn't bring to the table. My moves were a little bit more crisp. My focus was a little bit sharper, and I was able to have positive results and a positive performance in the second half of the season. And so it really goes to show that you can look at your setup as you look at your setback as a setup for your comeback. And I was able to go on and have some good success in my senior year and won my division, went on to finish as one of the top 10 wrestlers in the state for my weight class. And that was an accolade for me that if I'd have just squandered that opportunity to take advantage of the setback and turn that setback into a setup for my comeback. And that's one instance where early in life I saw that, it doesn't matter if you're down. You can still have success in the second half or second half pursuit of what you're going after. So what I like to do now is touch on yet another example, a more near-term case of how we can go about really digging even deeper and saying, okay, well, what if it's not brute force that gets you through your setback? How do you structurally and conceptually design a plan to get you on track for a comeback, even if we're talking about something more mental than physical? And in in this scenario, I remember it was a couple of years back, and we were having a lot of great success in our business after I had cut the cord with corporate America, and things were running along jiving, and we were set to start off the new year just continuing with the great momentum. And one of the things that was actually happening in the meantime that we didn't know was taking place was we had a little bit of trouble in paradise brewing. And to give you a little bit of a backstory, we got a small team that we work with. They're pretty nimble, and we facilitate a good number of real estate transactions. And one of our main team members at the time happened to be going through some personal challenges that were not privy to us. And what happened was, in short, we experienced one of our key frontline members essentially not performing at their best, right? And when we were still enhancing some of our systems to really get the business optimized for forward-looking success and tracking KPIs and other metrics that just make it easier to make sure that you are continuing to be able to even forecast success, not just experience it, as a result of massive imperfect action. You want to be able to forecast and predict as well, and just enjoy the fruits of your labor. So what we had was a scenario where, there was a little bit of a dip in the business. And, the thing that was so interesting about this scenario was that we weren't thinking about, how momentum can really have an effect. And if you're losing momentum and you don't know it, that's one problem. That's the first problem that you got to get fixed. And it's like, okay, once you recognize that you're losing momentum, you have to get that thing turned around, which is typically going to require some sort of change in behavior. And this isn't sports. You could be competitive in business, but it's not quite the same as the physical effort in sports, where it's like, all right, I'm going to just do more push-ups or stay after practice for an extra set of steps. This was going to require a lot more thought power and redirection and strategy. And that's where you really start to think about, okay, what do you do when you experience a setback, like in business, or maybe it's a complicated situation in the relationships of your family, right? Maybe you have great setup going, and there's an unexpected loss in the family that really throws a wrench into things. Death's never convenient, but how do you handle those? And I remember thinking, okay, we've got a situation on our hands that we need to quickly correct. And so as opposed to going into panic mode, it's more of a one of these things where you have to separate yourself from the situation, right? If you have a problem and you own that problem, it's like, okay, this is my problem. But the way you look at it is you have to think separately from the problem. If you're consistently thinking in the problem, all you can really see is the problem, right? And so that's the tricky piece, that we have to develop that habit of separating ourselves from our situation so that we can see the setback better, so we can understand and call out what it is and call it for what it is. And if it's a pattern of thinking, understand that you need to have better inputs to be able to create that change. And if it's your surroundings, you're either going to have to change your environment or start making some different selections with some of these influences that you select to keep around you. And so, what we were able to do in our situation is understand, okay, if we have a certain impact on the business, essentially it's a matter of, everyone using the power of the collective team and all of the skills and the know-how and the sweat equity ability, and everyone could roll their sleeves up in this case and get to work. And it was a matter of being smart about how we were going to tackle certain tasks together, right? Because I think that one of the important things in business for people to understand, that are interested in this topic, is that whenever there's success in business, it's because of the team. Right? It's not just, the star player alone. It takes the team, and, even some of the greatest stars of all time in all sports will clearly be able to tell you that. And in the same, when in times of struggle, there are situations to deal with, right? It's the teams that has to summon into their overall greatness to really be able to come together and summon the true skill, the true power, the true collective strength of the team. And that's what's going to put you in position to be able to overcome the problem that any individual might be facing, especially on their own. If it is a difficult personal challenge. So in this case, that was what we were able to do. And you go out there and say, okay, we're going to tackle this thing real quick and knock it all out and approach it as a team. But the reality of the matter is things get that much more tricky, and because you're always trying to do everything, but you always want to keep things in their proper perspective, and you can only be doing so many things at one time. So the biggest challenge was, how do we remain focused while all coming together as a team? And that was the piece where it took a lot of collaboration and thinking through and mapping out what are the processes of the business that you have to be aware of. And if you're looking at it from the personal perspective, it's like, what are the routines and habits and the things going on in my world that help to create the existence I'm having right now? Because if I can see those things better, see them in black and white, get them out on paper, draw them out, stick figures, whatever it takes, then I can better identify and categorize and summarize what some of these situations might be. So here in this case, we were able to identify different areas of the business and say, okay, here's how we can tackle these things, either as a collective group or by working on collaborating as many teams or reassigning certain tasks, just to alleviate the pressures of certain functions of the business that might be affected by personal situations. So, when you're looking at the landscape of what your challenge is, you've got to be able to identify kind of what's holding you back, so you can look at that thing and separate it, and isolate it to be able to say, okay, how do we address that piece? And if all we can fix is that, what impact will it have on the bigger thing? And if it's only a handful of things really, holding you back, which it typically is only, just a couple, then you start to make progress. And then you're able to start to gain some traction and momentum by doing things a little bit differently and doing them in a way that starts to create a new momentum. And that's where you're really going to be empowered. And that's how we were empowered to be able to get things back on track by saying, okay, how can we adjust the setup to be able to thrive? And that's really the main thing that I want to, put the point across here is, even when you're going through a setback, if you just are willing to step back and stop for a moment and assess what's really going on, and then you can make some better connections once you can see the thing that you're trying to, tackle and approach it potentially from a different perspective, or go back to your original battle plan and maybe just execute a little bit more effectively. And, the crazy thing about it was, in the end, it was all of a sudden you look up and we applied that effort. And yeah, there were some fun, not so fun times of just heads down doing things that we didn't particularly enjoy, other elements of the business. But the beauty of it was, once you kind of stick to a winning script and you focus on the execution, separate from the appetite for the effort, what you'll see is the compound effect take hold pretty quickly. And, we were able to actually finish the year with one of our strongest, performances to date. And it was crazy to think that, oh my goodness, this, the year seemed to kick off like it was, going to be a disaster, was, how we could have perceived this setback. But we were actually able to turn it around and, seek counsel, keep our mindset in the right place, and be willing to make the changes necessary to get the different result. And that's the key thing. If you're not pleased with the result midway through the deal, change up your activities, change up the game plan, change up something to get things back on track, to get you to the destination you want to be. And all of a sudden we find ourselves halfway through 2019. And whether you're making New Year's resolutions, quarterly goals, daily dedications, this is a great time to take and reflect and look back and say, all right, how's it going? And don't get hung up on the progress or lack thereof. If you feel set back, just recognize that you can set yourself up for a comeback. Right? Take this event and respond to it in a certain way, or take your status and respond to it in a certain way, where you reflect and adjust and recalibrate your focus. to push into the second half and be that second half superstar that I know it's possible for anyone can be. We can all think of whether it's sports or, our favorite, public figures that have maybe experienced adversity and came back to all of a sudden have, smashing success. We love to, it's amazing to be able to see that, right? Because the fortitude and the mentality applied to the situation and recognizing that it's just it's a temporary one. And we don't have to look at being down as being defeated, right? So hopefully that's something to help you guys close out the first half of 2019 and launch into July and the second half, so that you can still have the opportunity to have your best year ever, even if the stats don't say so now. Hey, we're moving in the second half. It's not the second quarter anymore, so we can even the score and go for more. With that, wishing you all a great first half of the year and an even better second half. Thanks again for listening, and be sure to share and tag a friend that you think might enjoy what I just dropped on you today. See ya.
The podcast you just heard was made using Anchor. Ever thought about making your own podcast? Anchor makes it really easy for anyone to get started. It's a one-stop shop for recording, hosting, and distributing podcasts. Best of all, it's 100% free. Sign up now at anchor.fm/new. That's anchor.fm/new to get started.